Good morning, everybody. Happy Thursday. We're going to go ahead and get started, and folks can continue to join as we get started with the presentation. But just quickly, I wanted to welcome you all to our FY25 Charter Portal petition portal and budget webinar. This is going to be kind of a supplemental webinar to our Petitioner Bootcamp and some of our other training materials regarding starting a charter school in Georgia. And this webinar itself is designed to support some of the more technical aspects of submitting a petition to the SCSC. So we'll do some demoing of our platform and our templates, but just wanted to give some more hands-on applicable TA for our petition process. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Kristen Easterbrook, and I am the Director of New Schools here at the SCSC and kind of lead the team that runs our petitions process. I'm going to be joined by Kira Thompson, our Legal Program Specialist, to do a demo of the actual portal itself. And then later on in the morning, you'll hear from Carmen Fremar, our Senior Director of Finance, who will be going over the budget template itself. All right, just really quickly to get started, we always kick off every presentation that we do with our vision and mission, so you can see those here on the screen. The important part for you all to know is that one of our key components of what we do is authorizing high-quality charter schools that will provide students with a better educational opportunity than they would otherwise receive in a traditional school district or their zoned school. And that's where you all come in. So we're hoping to see some high quality charter petitions come before us this cycle so we can have some high quality charter school options for students in Georgia. Really quickly, I just want to highlight some of the petition timeline pieces that you're going to want to make note of. You would have seen these as well during our Petitioner Bootcamp. They're also on our website, so please feel free to check those out. But here as well, just want to highlight the petition platform is now open. It opened on the 1st, so on Friday morning, it went live. Feel free to go ahead and check it out, start poking around, make an application. If you haven't already done so, Kira will show you how to do that in just a couple of minutes. The petition itself will close on March 14th, 2025, so a few months from now, and it will close at 5 p.m. that day. Please make sure that you are submitting your petitions and hitting that final submit button by that deadline. That allows us to review the application. So please mark that March 14th date on your calendar as well. Following that submission in March, the SCSU will begin doing its review process, which ultimately leads into a capacity interview. Capacity interviews are scheduled to begin the week of June 2nd. We anticipate the first 2, possibly 3 weeks in June for those capacity interviews. It depends on the number of school applications that we receive as to how many weeks we need. But please go ahead and mark your calendars for the beginning of June for those capacity interviews. So hold that time and plan to be available for something if scheduled. And then assuming that those 2 weeks are able to be our capacity interviews, we then anticipate beginning to make recommendations to our board regarding approvals in our July meeting, so at the end of July in 2025. Something to note as well, it's not on this slide, but we also have a letter of intent requirement for our startup cycle this year. That is new, and as well as for anybody who might be considering a replication. So the letters of intent are due to the SCSC via email, and the process is on our website, but those letters of intent are due by December 31st of this year. So if you already know that you're planning to submit an application, please go ahead and submit that letter of intent. There is a form on our website. If you go under the Start a Schools page on our website under Start a Charter School, it is right there. It's a fillable form, fillable PDF, very simple, a couple questions, and that gets sent into our office. So please go ahead and do that if you are considering submitting a petition to the SCSC. Just so really quickly, want to do a quick refresher. We discussed this a lot at Petitioner Bootcamp in more detail, but it is going to be helpful to just have some frame of reference for what is in the petition. So that way you can kind of see how that looks when Kira does the actual demo in a couple of minutes. So the petition consists of three main parts. There is a narrative section, the budget template, and then some required uploads, appendices that we have. The budget narrative is the question set. You'll see that in more detail later this morning, but ultimately this is the plan to address the school's mission and operational plan for the school, how it's going to open. Please note that many of the questions include a word limit, and so we want to just emphasize here that we want you to be succinct in your responses and put the requisite content in those budget narrative questions or in the petition narrative questions there. The next portion is the budget template. Carmen will go into more detail about how that actually operates, but just something for you to know at the start, there are two budgets that are going to be required to submit. One is at your 100% enrollment, and another is intended to be a stress test and will be at your 65% enrollment mark. And you must submit the budget for your proposed school on the SCSC's budget template. Carmen will reemphasize this, I'm sure, during her presentation a number of times, but I want to make sure you all hear it from multiple people. Please note, we will not review any petition that does not have its budget in the SCSC budget template. That means don't convert it to Apple numbers. That means don't unlock the formulas. That means don't copy it and paste it into a new Excel. There's a lot of formulas built into our template to make sure that we have accurate numbers. And it's a really wonderful tool, but I just want to highlight that for you all, that is a really critical component. Carmen will say it again a dozen times more, I'm sure, later on this morning, but please upload it in the SCSC budget template format. And then the last piece here is the required appendices. So these are some supplemental uploads that you will have. Some examples include proof of concurrent submission, your nonprofit registration, some other community engagement documentation, conflict of interest forms, resumes for your board members, a staffing plan for LEA obligations. And I just highlight that all to say is that these are going to be specific uploads that we require. There are also additional uploads or a supplemental document space for you to upload things that might be really pertinent to explain some of your academic model. But I just want to caution folks that is not a way to skirt the word limit in the narrative, which is why I mentioned that above. Those additional document uploads aren't a space to just add like a continued to the end of your narrative question and then pick up where you left off in an uploaded appendices. We are committed to reading the petition in full, but we also recognize that we need to be able to get what we need from the budget or from the petition narrative itself. So staff may or may not be able to get through all of the additional documents uploaded outside of what it was requested by the SCSC. So please be mindful as you're uploading those documents there that we're really focused on the quality of responses in the narrative section of the petition and not necessarily on quantity or tons of supplemental documents that you upload. I just want to highlight as well, this was something that was new last year, but is one more technical assistance opportunity that I would really want to make sure that you all are aware of. We have a petitioner orientation. This is an asynchronous webinar that is intended to clarify some of our expectations throughout the petition process. It's a little bit more like tips and tricks, goes over things like what you can expect during the capacity interviews in advance of the deadline, that sort of thing. This is a required training for all SCSC petitioners. So as a part of completing this, you will get a certificate of completion from the system, and that you have to upload into the portal itself as a part of the petition, and it's a required upload. Petitions that don't include the certificate of completion may be withdrawn from further consideration and not reviewed at all. So this is a technical requirement that we have. Please go ahead and check that out. It is linked in the petition, and it is the link to the orientation is also on our website. Something to note, and it's in the instructions itself in the portal when you look at this upload, but the person who is submitting your application, so the person that you list as the point of contact for your application, is the person who is required to attend petitioner orientation. Obviously, you can have more than one person go through the orientation, watch the webinar. I would in fact encourage it, but the upload itself is for the primary petitioner. So please make sure that you are making sure whoever you're listing as that person on your application is also the person who is taking the petitioner orientation. Just want to highlight that. If you petitioned to the SCSC last year and went through the petitioner orientation process, then we will honor and recognize the certificate from the FY24 cycle. The content is largely the same from last cycle to this cycle, with the exception of some modifications to the dates in there. So we'll honor an FY24 petitioner orientation certificate. But if you are new to the process and haven't taken orientation before, please go ahead and do so and upload that certificate. And lastly, before I turn it over to Kira to do a demo of the actual portal, I wanted to just highlight some resources that are available to you regarding starting a school. So if you go to the SCSC's website, there is one of the main header tabs that's called Start a New School. Please go check that out. There's tons of resources. Links to this video, for example, will be up. Links to our petitioner orientation, previous orientation materials, boot camp is there, guidance documents, all that kind of stuff is included on this page. So I would really encourage you to go through that and take advantage of all these resources that are available. All of the petitioner boot camp recordings and slides are there. That is a 5-hour webinar that goes over all of it. So if you're new to this process and want to know what it's like to start a charter school, that's a great place to start. We also include information about our FY25 petition priorities. So please go ahead and check that out. There's guidance around relevant laws and policies that you'll need to know. There's also a sample charter contract, so you can see, if approved, what your charter contract would look like, because sometimes there are additional requirements in a charter contract that are a little different or more expanded than what's the basics required in rule and law. So just so you're familiar with what that looks like, go ahead and check out that charter contract. There's other guidance documents. There's concurrent submission guidance documents on there. So if you have questions about the concurrent submission process, all that is to say, there's tons and tons of resources on our website. Please go ahead and check those out. And if after reviewing those, you still have some questions, feel free to reach out and we might be able to create another resource based on your guidance. So with that, I want to go ahead and turn it over to Kira Thompson in our office to give an overview of the portal.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Kristen, for that introduction. So I will be going over how to access our petitioner application and kind of giving you a brief overview of the format of it. So this is not a new requirement. All SCSC petitions must be submitted through our online portal. I'll use the remainder of my piece of this presentation to briefly go over how to access it and just generally talk about the format of the application. And now I'm ready to do that. Can everyone see my screen? It should just be a blank browser.
We can see it.
Okay, awesome. All right, so very easy to access our petition. The first thing you're going to do is go to our website, which is scSC.Georgia, if I can spell Georgia right, .gov. Then you're going to go to menu, start a school, click on this little down arrow here, start a new school, and then scroll down to this little section here that says Startup Application Portal. And then once you click this, you'll be taken to the online platform we use to accept petitions. Please read this brief little introduction and instructions here. There's some petitioner guidance linked here that Kristen had gone over just a few minutes ago. But when you're ready to create your application, you'll select Apply. My school is called the Best Charter School. And I'll select Create Application. So I'm already signed in, but if you were not signed in or you don't have an account yet, you would be prompted to either log in or create your account. So just make note of that. I am actually going to, as you can see, this is the application that I have to complete now, and there are several tasks that I must complete before my application is ready for submission. I have already created a demo application that I'm going to share with you now, so I'm going to transition into that. Okay, so now we are at my demo application. So the first thing you'll do is read the petition instructions and then acknowledge that you have read them. So before proceeding with completing any part of your application, please ensure you have read the instructions. When you click this link, a new window will populate and you can see the instructions here. So once you have read those, you're going to select this box here and click Mark as Complete. Once you select Mark as Complete, basically the entirety of the petition will open. And as you can see, I now have access to all of the other tasks except for this last one here, but we'll get to that one in a minute. So the first thing you'll complete after acknowledging you have read the instructions is the petition information. Ensure the contact information you have included here is accurate. This is the contact that we will use to provide updates on the status of your petition. So make sure that whoever you put here is the person you want to receive those updates. One other thing is you'll be asked to provide some just general information about your petition, such as your requested grade bands and your enrollment. One thing I want to emphasize here is to make sure that whatever you put here is accurate and consistent throughout your petition. Past years, there will be a little inconsistencies with the projected enrollment numbers or the LEAs that you want to serve. And that can cause a lot of confusion for our staff when we're reading through the petition. So that's an easy way to make sure that we can avoid that confusion. So I'm done with this. I'm going to click Mark as Complete, and you'll see for each task that I go through, I'm going to select Mark as Complete. Next is enrollment information. Similar thing here. When you complete your this enrollment table, ensure that you are matriculating your students properly and that you are adding up the totals in this last column here correctly as well. Also want to emphasize that ensure that whatever you have put in this table is consistent with what you have put in your budget template. Again, this is an area where we have experienced some confusion just due to some inconsistencies between the two sources of information. I'm done here. I'm going to select Mark as Complete. Next is school overview. So this is just some very general questions about your petition and your proposed school. The only thing I want to highlight here is most, and Kristen had already kind of alluded to this, but most text boxes have a word limit. Sometimes it's right here in front of you. Sometimes once you click on and start typing in the box, you'll see it at the bottom here. So just be aware of that as you complete your responses. The next part of the petition is academics, operations, governance, and finance. This is the real meat of the petition. You'll probably be spending most of your time completing this task. This is the narrative portion that Kristen was talking about earlier. I am not going to go through every single question, of course, but I do want to highlight that in our petition, we have what we call trigger questions. So if you respond a certain way to a multiple choice question, additional questions may populate, and I'll just go over the few that we have in this section of the petition. So the first one we have is question 9, attendance zone. So if you select defined attendance zone, you have an additional question here, and same with statewide, you have an additional question. Again, make sure that whatever attendance zone you select here is consistent with what you have put in the petitioner information section. The next trigger question we have is regarding charter high schools. If you're not pursuing a charter high school, then you don't have anything additional to complete, but if you select yes here, you have one additional question regarding graduation requirements. Next is question 18 regarding virtual schools. If your school plans to offer exclusive or hybrid virtual learning, you'll have an additional question to complete. I do want to highlight here that there are several parts to this question, so please ensure that you're answering the entire question in each part. And as we scroll down in the petition, you'll see that there are several questions that have multiple parts. So just make sure you're reading the question in its entirety. The next one is farther down in the petition. So let me get there. Next is question 46. I just want to highlight this one because this one's a new question from last year and it is optional. So if you have information to provide here regarding facilities review with DOE, this is where you would put that information. But if you don't, then this is an optional question. Question 50, this is for previous applicants only. So if you have applied to the SCSC and received a recommendation of denial, you have an additional question to complete here about the changes you have made since your previous application. Of course, if you didn't, you have nothing else to complete. Next is, and the last part of this task is just questions regarding a partnership with an ESP. This won't be applicable to all petitioners, but if you do plan to contract with an ESP, you'll have several questions that will populate. We have added several more questions to this section if the ESP has an established track record in another state. There are some additional questions to complete, but I'll scroll down so you can see those. Again, as you can see, there are multiple parts to each question here. But yes, so if it's an established ESP, if you select yes, and then select yes to that the ESP plans to pursue multiple charter schools within the state in the next 5 years, you'll have several more questions to complete. So just be aware of that. But I'm done with this section. I'm going to mark as complete. And next, we're going to move on to concurrent submission. Basically, unless you're submitting a petition for a statewide virtual school, you'll have to complete some type of concurrent submission requirement. You can refer to the petitioner instructions and resources for more information on that. But if you are pursuing a statewide virtual only school, you would select yes here, and then you can move on with the petition. But for demonstration purposes, my school is not. My school is serving a defined attendance zone or a statewide attendance zone that is brick and mortar. So review the instructions, again, for which requirements you have depending on the type of attendance zone that you're applying for. This is where you would upload your proof of concurrent submission. And if your school plans to serve a defined attendance zone specifically, you have some additional questions. This is a new requirement from last year. If the school will serve a defined attendance zone, and the petitioner will have submitted its local petition to the local school district it is proposing to locate in by the SCSC petition deadline, you must upload the local petition here. If the local petition deadline is after the SCSC deadline, then upon a submission to the local district, you would send that petition to Brooke. So, and the last part of this is that there are some assurances here, and then you'll have to sign below. As you can see, I wrote sign. I'm embarrassed with my signature, so that's what I put. Okay. So I'm going to mark as complete and move on. Next is assurances and signatures. This is what it sounds like. You have multiple assurances to acknowledge that you understand and agree to the following. This is going to ask you for some dates. It's going to ask the charter petitioner / school leader to sign it and the governing board chairperson. Once you have done that, you'll hit mark as complete. All right, now we're getting to the part of the petition we're just going to have to upload a bunch of documents. This is the appendices portion that Kristen was talking about earlier. So I'm not going to go through all of these in detail, but the first one that we have is your upload of certificate of incorporation. The only thing I want to call out here is that once you upload a document, you can change the title of it by selecting the 3 dots next to the document and click edit. And then you can change the name of the document here. Next is bylaws, where you will upload the nonprofit corporation bylaws. Then we have resumes. One thing I want to point out for resumes is that sometimes petitioners will combine all of the resumes of each governing board member and administrator into one document. That makes it a little difficult for us to parse each resume out. So our preference is that you upload each resume individually. So you can see here that I have a school leader resume and I have a board chair resume. Next is an optional task. This is one of the supplemental / optional appendices that Kristen was talking about earlier. So if you have any agreements with third parties, this excluding the ESP agreement, this is where you would upload that. Of course, if you don't have anything, you are not required to complete this task. Next is uploading any agreements reflecting any partnerships. One thing about this task is that we have provided examples of what is sufficient evidence and what is insufficient evidence. So please make sure that you are reviewing each of these examples and reading these instructions before submitting your partnership letters. Now we're getting to the budget pieces of the application. Carmen will be going into detail about this in a few minutes, so I will not do that. But just generally, the first budget submission acknowledgement, the first budget related task is the submission acknowledgement and sign off. You'll have to click on these that you acknowledge and agree to these requirements, sign, mark as complete, and then the next couple of tasks will be uploading the 100% projected student enrollment and the 60 projected student enrollment budgets. The template is linked in the task itself. So once you click on this, it'll download and ask you to save it, and then you'll have the template. So once you have completed that template, you would then upload it here. Please make sure, Kristen has already called out this. This is not the first time you've heard this, and it won't be the last time you've heard this, but you must use our template. The uploads must be in Excel and must not have been converted to other type of like Apple numbers or anything, or Google Sheets or anything like that. Read the instructions. There's instructions in the budget template, and then also the petitioner instructions provide some instructions as well. So please make sure that you are following our requirements very carefully here. Okay, I'm going to mark this as complete and do the same for the 65% budget. Next, we have upload documentation of additional revenue. This is only applicable if you have included additional revenue in your budget. You need to upload some type of documentation that substantiates that you have received this revenue. So this is where you would do that. Of course, if you did not include additional revenue in your budget, you do not have to complete this task. This task is optional. And then the last budget-related task is uploading evidence to support budget expenses. This is a new one from last year as well. So this is where you would upload any quotes that you have, any communications with the vendors you have, to kind of corroborate how you came up with the numbers in your budget. Next is upload curriculum documentation. So this is a new one from last year as well. You'll download this template like you did for the budget application, same thing. If you click this, it'll download. You'll use this template, complete it, and then upload it here. In addition to the template, you'll also upload a preliminary scope and sequence for either math or ELA. But make sure you're reading the instructions here. It'll tell you exactly what to do. I'm going to mark this as complete and move on. Next is uploading the organizational chart. Again, this is a new one from last year as well. Please read the instructions, exactly what we're looking for in the organizational chart. Then you'll upload the school year schedule, then the daily schedule, this is another optional task, the upload agreements with local districts / schools. So this is only if you have any agreements with the local district or any local schools. Then you'll upload a copy of the school's emissions policy. You'll separately upload a copy of the school's emissions application. So just make note that these are different requirements that we're asking of you. Next is facility information. The emissions application upload. Community engagement information. This is a new requirement from last year. So for this one, you'll complete this in this chart that we have here. This is a big old chart. So you can kind of move and see all the columns by using the scroll bar down here. This is for you to complete and respond to any community engagement events that you've had as you have, organized your petition and went through those type of, informational events or whatever it may be. The first row here, the CE event 1, this is the only required row. The rest of these events are optional if you have more than one community event that you want to include here. You can make the boxes bigger too by dragging this down, which I think is pretty neat. And then once you're complete this, you'll upload your supporting documentation. So my community event was an event in Atlanta for parents and students at a community center. And as my supporting documentation, I've uploaded a sign-in sheet from that event. We are getting towards the end of the petition. We just have a few more things that we need to complete. So the next thing is conflict of interest form. So all governing board members and administrators must complete a conflict of interest. Read these instructions here, and then you'll select how many forms you need. It's just me working on this petition, so I really just need one. But however many you select here, that many conflict of interest forms will populate once you select mark as complete. So I'm going to select mark as complete. And then I will have a conflict of interest form populate for me to complete. This is also kind of a big table. Again, scroll here and you'll see the yes or no to respond. For anything that I respond yes to, I'll have a box will populate here for me to explain why I responded yes. This is a 2-page task. So once you're complete this, so select next. And then you'll have a couple more questions to answer, and then you'll sign and then give contact information for the person completing the form. So the person for each individual, they'll have to sign this themselves. And then once I'm done, I'm going to select mark as complete. We are almost done. So the last few things we have here is uploading any additional information. There's very few things that you can upload here. So make sure you read this list to see which documents you can upload here. You can't just upload whatever you want. As Kristen said, this is not an opportunity for you to expound upon anything that you couldn't fit in a text box in the narrative portion. So I have the bibliography for my petition that I want included, so I went ahead and upload that here. I'm gonna mark this as complete. This is the uploading the certificate of completion for the petitioner orientation. So once you complete the webinar, you'll receive a certificate of completion within 24 hours after completing the webinar. As Kristen said, last year's is fine as long as it's still the same contact person that you included in the beginning of the petitioner information section here. Next, we have upload the, this is for the letter of intent confirmation. So once you submit your letter of intent by the deadline, you'll receive a confirmation email confirming that we received it. And this is where you would upload that confirmation. Okay. Last, I don't know why this is not. Okay, this is supposed to be open for me now. Once I've select all mark as complete, I'll look into this. But once all of these tasks have been completed, you can see that they're all complete because of the check boxes here. That means that they're complete. This is the petition submission acknowledgement. So this says that I am acknowledging that I have to submit my petition for the SCSC to receive it. We've had this issue kind of come up in the past few years where at least one person thinks they've submitted the application, but they really haven't. And I think the confusion stems from this marking as complete feature. So when, as you can recall, I was selecting mark as complete, and I think people get confused that means that that's submitting the petition to us, and it's not. We only receive the petition if you click this submit button here. We're having a little bit of a technical difficulty here where I can't edit this, but once I complete this task, the submit button will appear green, and then I can submit my petition. That is the entire petition application. I will check in on this requirement after this webinar is complete, but I'm going to go back to my application and just kind of call out a few tips. If you want to add any collaborators to your petition, say that you're working, you've divided the petition up by content area and you have multiple people working on it, you can add collaborators by selecting this button here, and you'll type in their email address and they will receive an email to access the petition. I'm going to add Kristen as my collaborator, and she will receive an email from me, or from the portal, I should say. Next thing, before you submit your petition completely, please review it for consistency and accuracy. Again, this is to avoid confusion from us. And yeah. And then one last thing that you can do from here is once you complete your petition, we strongly recommend that you download the petition for your own records. And you could do this by this dashboard here by selecting these three dots and clicking download. And then your petition will download and you can have that for your records. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and go back to the slides. We're going to kind of breeze through these next few slides because it's just reiterating the same information that I have shown you. So let's move on. Here's some additional portal tips. If you need to change the email address or the name or the password associated with your account, you can do that from the account settings. Please note that the SCSC can't change your password for you, so you'll have to do that on your own. You also want to make sure that you can receive emails from SM Apply, which is the platform that we use to host the petition application. In this presentation here, it's hyperlinked under this. So make sure that you can receive emails, that the domain isn't blocked through your email. Again, you must click submit for the SCSC to receive your petition. Marking as complete is not the same as submitting, and that does not submit your petition to the SCSC. If you do not hit submit, we do not receive your petition. And then also download your petition, of course. These next few slides, or these next couple of slides, just kind of highlight some of the new requirements that I had already touched on in the demo. So I'm not going to go over these in detail again, but just generally I'll list them out. So one of the new requirements this year is submitting a letter of intent. You must submit that by the deadline prior to submitting your application. Those are due December 31st, 2024. Upload evidence to support budget expenses, curriculum documentation, and the organizational chart are new requirements from last year. Instructions for those were included in the petition application. Same as concurrent submission, community engagement information, and certificate of completion for petition orientation. Those are new requirements from last year. Instructions for those are also included in the petitioner application. We went over how there are new questions in the ESP addendum. If for ESPs with an established track record in other states. And then lastly, the submission acknowledgement, that is a new requirement from last year that is acknowledging that you must submit your petition, must click submit for the SCSC to receive your petition. And that is all I have for you all. And I will take any questions if there are any, and if not, we'll move it on to Carmen.
Not seeing any questions here in the chat box, but feel free to drop them in as you think of them, and we'll have another opportunity for questions too at the end.
All right, well, thank you, everyone. I'll be around to answer any questions throughout the end of the webinar. But next is Carmen to talk about the budget.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Carmen Freemeyer. I'm the Director of Finance here at the State Charter Schools Commission. And as Kira said, I'm going to be walking you through the budget template just to kind of give you some background. We're going to go through a few slides. This will just be a refresher. Many of you were participating in the other petitioner webinar we did. So we're going to go through the slides. I'm going to go through an in-depth presentation in terms of how to complete the budget template. I will pause during several parts of that to make sure that you're absorbing the information and if you have any questions. So let's go ahead and get started. So as you've heard ad nauseum, keep the budget template the way it is. Don't try to convert it. Don't try to copy it and put it into something else. And please do not use something you did in maybe you applied in a prior year and you're trying to use the same budget template. Please don't do any of those things. The other thing that we need is a 100% budget. And what we mean by 100% is a school that is fully enrolled, which means that you estimated you were going to have 500 students and you have 500 students. 65% means 65% enrollment. So whatever 65% is of 500, then that's where you're enrolled. And the 65% budget is a more difficult budget to complete because it forces you to make those difficult decisions regarding if you don't make your enrollment targets. And we'll talk about that when we're doing the demonstration. The other thing is the budget template is like a self-contained little world. It is locked. So don't try to add rows or columns because what's going to happen is the linkages that are in this spreadsheet are going to not work. So you want to make sure that you are not trying to kind of change it in any way. And again, make sure that you submit both versions, that 100% and that 65% version. Once the budgets are submitted, your process is complete, and you cannot make changes or updates to your petition budget once it is submitted through the portal. So what you want to make sure of is when you're completing it, that you've looked through it, you've had somebody else look through it before you submit to us. So the budget template is made up of these different tabs. We have an instructions tab, you have the template itself, a staffing plan, your cash balances, and your cash flow. So we're going to walk through all of those, and I'm going to explain what all of those do. So don't be nervous or worried about it. It really will be self-explanatory. Now, what is the budget template exactly? Hold on one second. Okay. So as I've said before in prior presentations, this budget is not going to be what's going to happen if your school is approved. It's basically giving you specific circumstances, information to you to be able to see how your school, what kind of funding your school might be able to receive when it actually opens. There are a lot of the things that are going to affect this. The QBE that's in place. QBE stands for quality-based education. This is how the state funds all public schools. State charter schools are considered public schools. So your funding is composed of the quality-based education funding formula as well as the charter school supplement. So those two pieces combined are going to be your state funding portion. The other thing that affects your revenue is how many students you actually have in the building. That's why we have the 100% and the 65% budget. Also, the state will fund certain teaching positions if they're certified. So we're going to talk about that. And so what your template is basically showing us is that you have a business plan, that your template shows that you know how to make prudent financial decisions, you understand what your revenues are going to be, and basically your budget shows how the plan that you have in your petition, because the petition and the budget template go hand in hand, it shows how your school is going to have a functioning financial framework. And as I've said, the budget template is not going to be what's going to happen if your school is approved and is operating. It is simply giving you an example with certain information that we have today. Also, you're going to get a disclaimer, which basically says these things, that the budget template, including the revenue that it calculates, it's only intended for educational purposes. There's no guarantee of anything. So basically, you're going to see this disclaimer when you're in the portal. Also, when you submit your budget, you're going to also see this sign off. So it's this acknowledgement basically of the things that I have just said, that this is not a real world scenario. Also, that if your submission does not comply with the requirements of the application, it's going to be rejected. So if you are rejected, you are not going to be able to reapply until the following cycle. So again, check everything before you submit your 100% and your 65% enrolled budgets. So before we go into the budget template, just want to make sure you understand, do not overestimate your student enrollment. This is where a lot of schools tend to, they kind of project too high. And what happens is when you overestimate the number of students you have, you're going to inflate how much money you have to run your school. Also, overestimating the training and experience of the teachers you're going to be able to have, because most new schools have difficulty attracting experienced teachers. Also, don't include unguaranteed revenue unless you have documentation that these funds are going to be received outside of state funding. You do not include it in this budget. Only include funds that your school has definitely been awarded. Expenses. These are the common things that we see. People drastically underestimate their personnel costs. They underestimate their facilities costs. Try to keep your facilities costs to 15% of the budget, but also be realistic. Make sure you budget things for renovation, maintenance, those types of things. Also, there are academic programs that are listed in the petition that have no expense lines in the budget. So basically anything that you plan to do is going to have a cost. So make sure that those things are reflected in your budget template. Also, if you have an expense that's being donated, so there's really no cost associated with it, make sure that you put those types of things in the notes. So we do have a note section in the budget template to help you explain certain things. So make sure you make use of that. Also, expenditures inappropriately allocated, which basically means you have one expense that might happen only one time in the year, but you spread it over 12 months. So I'll show in the budget template what I mean by that, but that's one of the things also you want to avoid. So without further ado, we're going to go into the budget template demo. And I'm going to go ahead and show my screen. Okay, so if someone can let me know, do they see the Excel template on their screens?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, great. So here is the instructions tab. So as I was saying, here are the specific tabs that you're going to see. You have your instructions. As with everything, read the instructions first. You have your staffing plan, your budget, your cash balances, and then we have cash flow projections for your planning year, year 1 of operations as a school, as well as year 2. Note that the only revenue that we're going to reflect in this budget template is state revenue. Federal funds are not included, is simply straight up state funds. Also, make sure you use the notes to provide context. More detail is better than no detail. Also note that in the planning year, there are certain cells that are disabled because there are things that are not going to be applicable to your school during the planning year. For example, there is no state funding provided to a school during its planning year. So you will be placing for revenue those things that you're going to use to fund your planning year, but you're not going to have state funds that planning year. Also, your staff is going to be probably very limited during your planning year. You might have some administrative staff, maybe you have some maintenance staff, but you're not going to have teachers and those types of things because you're not a fully operating school. Also, the spreadsheet is set to round all numbers, so don't bother to put in cents because it's just going to round everything up. And as I said before, there are calculations embedded in this. The calculations are set up so that pretty much all you have to do is type in numbers, and the spreadsheet will do the rest, which is why we emphasize that you do not try to change it in any way. The one problem that I saw a lot last year was a lot of people trying to convert this file to Apple numbers. So just don't do that because it just will not work. And if you've done that and then you contact us telling us the sheet's not working, we're going to tell you to re-download the original form. Also, the revenue that you're going to see is based on the QBE funding formula as well as the supplement for the information that we have for fiscal year 25. As I've said, fiscal year 25 is not the year you're opening, but that's the information that we have today. So we're going to go ahead and start. So we're going to go through the staffing plan. So the staffing plan, the reason why we have the staffing plan tab is because in prior years, what was happening, people put positions in their petition, and then we weren't seeing them on the budget. And so what this is for is kind of a separate planning document. So what happens in column B is state charter schools are actually considered local education agencies, an LEA. And so there are certain functions that as a school district, you have to perform. So those functions are out delineated in column B. So they're pretty general, they're pretty self-explanatory, so I'm not going to go through all of them. But for example, you'll have someone who's responsible for student enrollment and admissions. If you're receiving federal funding, you're going to have a federal programs person who's going to handle the administration of those programs. Now, the column C is for the name of the person, the title that you are using for the person who's going to be handling these functions. You can have one person who has multiple functions. So in this example, this demonstration I have, this template is completed so that you can see how this should look. Now, this is not exactly how yours is going to look, but it does give you an example of what you should be doing. So for example, here we have student enrollment and admissions. We have this petitioner decided to use the term of title as registrar. Now, column D, for uniformity purposes, the State Charter Schools Commission, we kind of group these functions into this category of different positions. So what you're going to do here is we're going to say, okay, our registrar, that is close to, we're going to say that's probably close to somebody who would be considered a director of operations. Then in column E, you put in the salary for this person. You do not put in the fringe, just simply the salary. Then you identify which row this particular position is. This will help us as we review the petition to find your different staff, know how much you're planning to pay for them, and where they are in your specific budget template. This will also help you as a petitioner not to forget to add a position that you have in your petition. A position that you have in your petition. So this kind of helps you set out that staffing framework. So once you've completed this, and I would suggest that you do this first, and again, you should have a title for each one of these functions. Your school will be responsible for doing all of these different functions. So you want to make sure you have a person assigned to each function. Again, you can have one person with multiple functions. This also helps you to see if one person is doing too much. So it kind of helps you again with the planning. Then you are going to choose the category, the title that the State Charter Schools Commission uses simply to help you with alignment. You're going to put the salary, and you're going to let us know where we can find this in your budget template. So now we're going to go into the actual budget template. So the budget template, it starts out with your assumptions. So the assumptions that you're going to have are things like your anticipated square footage of your building. You're going to have your anticipated student-teacher ratio. These are things that you are going to enter. What's your average teacher salary you estimate? Again, you're only going to put in salary. You're not going to put anything related to health insurance or FICA or any of those things that I will refer to as fringe. So you're just going to put in your salary. You're also going to let us know if you're going to offer a nutrition program. One thing of note, a lot of schools do end up offering a school lunch program. It is very difficult, given all the requirements, to actually have that up and running in year one. So most schools are going to select no, and then maybe you would see yes. Now, what happens is, as I was talking with linkages, these things then will determine if certain revenue pieces pop up further down in the spreadsheet. And then the other piece is, are you going to offer a transportation program? So if you decide not to offer a transportation program, the state does provide some funding. It's not a lot, but it does provide some funding for transportation. So again, if you mark no, and I will show how this changes things in the spreadsheet, you will see that your revenue does change. So for example, here we have the revenue. This school is providing a transportation program. If you go down to the revenue, and you will see down here we have state transportation grant. This school has said yes, they're providing transportation, but no, they're not providing a nutrition program in year one, but they are providing it in year two. So based on the enrollment that I have, you see that there is funding that populates. These cells are locked for the demonstration purposes because I want to have freedom to be able to show you certain things. This spreadsheet is completely unlocked. But when you're doing this, what's going to happen is you're not going to be able to change anything here. It is just automatically going to populate. Also, nursing. There's a $20,000 grant that is provided each year to state charter schools except in year one, which is why cell C38 is blacked out, because you're not going to be receiving those nursing funds until year two. Okay. And just give me a second because I have notes that I wanted to make sure that I pointed out while we were doing this demonstration. So now the next piece is going to be, as I said before, you have your school. So you're going to put in, so Kira called us the best charter school, so that's what I put in. Here is where you show us if this is your 100% budget or your 65% budget. So make sure when you're doing your template that you remember which one you're doing, so you don't send us two of the same thing. So you're doing your 100% budget, or if you're doing your 65% budget. One thing I want to tell you, just because you've changed it to 65% doesn't mean that any of this is going to change. You have to go in and make all those decisions as to how you're going to reflect your 65% budget. But here we're going to show a fully enrolled school. Now, in this demonstration, I have enrollment for students in bricks and mortar setting and students in a virtual setting. Most of you are going to have bricks and mortar. Just for demonstration purposes, I have all of this completed. So in this example, we have a school that is going to have students. Now, again, most of you are not going to start off in year one with kids in kindergarten all the way through 12th grade. but I wanted you to see how this could look. So when you have your students here in kindergarten, this is going to affect how much you earn in state revenue. So when you look down here, let's see. Yeah, okay, so here we have our students in kindergarten. Here we have our state revenue is all the way down here. So one of the things I want to show you is, and I'm going to do this. So notice right now with 50 kindergarten students, we're earning, along with all the other things, we're earning almost $5 million. Now look what happens when I either delete this. So let's say we're not going to have any kindergartners. It drops down the revenue. So what I'm trying to show you here is these numbers that you enter here are totally going to change your revenue. So I'm going to change this down to 5. When that happens, notice these numbers change because obviously this reflects your total enrollment. And as Kira was saying before, make sure that what you're putting here is aligning to what you're putting in the template. We see a lot of misalignment between what people are putting for their enrollment in the budget template and then what they're putting in the petition. Again, these two things, the petition, everything in the petition should be reflected as costs or data points in the budget template. So make sure that who you have enrolled here is what you have in your petition. So we changed that from 50 down to 5. Notice the state funding also changed down from that almost 5 million to now we're down to about 4.5 million for year 1 and so on and so forth. So again, everything that you enter here in terms of your enrollment is going to affect your state revenue. And this is why I was talking about do not work your enrollment to make your budget work. Be realistic about how many students you're going to have in year 1. Most schools struggle with enrollment year 1 because you're an untested thing. Parents are a lot of times reluctant to enroll a child in a school that is brand new. So be realistic. And also remember, when you're doing your 65% budget, these numbers are going to be changed. They have to reflect the decreased enrollment that the 65% budget is supposed to be showing. So the virtual setting, there are slightly different funding for virtual students. I'm not going to go into that here for lack of time, but just know that this also, it has the same effect. So the other piece that you have here is number of full-time employees. Now, as I said before, the state will pay some funds for your certified staff. Non-certified staff do not earn state funds. So what you want to make sure of is, again, that you are realistic with about how many teachers you're going to be hiring. We have checkpoints built into the budget template this year. A lot of times I saw a misalignment between the student-teacher ratio that people were entering for row 5, but then when you looked at rows 23 and 25 for the certified staff, there was a misalignment. And so in this example, this is how many people, how many teachers are entered. So we have here the 22. So we have these two teachers. We have the formula sets it up so you can see once you enter how many staff you're planning, does this align with how many teachers you planned to have as your student teacher ratio? So in this student teacher ratio for row, we show that we're going to actually have 24 students for every 1 teacher. Now that might be doable for you. And if that's how you want to do it based on how many kids you're going to have, how many teachers you plan to hire, then what you might want to do is then go back up to your student teacher ratio and change it to 24 to 1. So this checkpoint, and this is also locked so that you can see what's happening, because a lot of times we do see a misalignment here. also in this little table here, this shows you those funding elements that I was talking about for the state funding formula. I'm not going to go over it here. Again, we don't have a ton of time. So this just gives you the funding revenue that you would earn for fiscal year 25, which is not going to be the year that you're operational, but this is what we are working with. So I'm going to go through here is the QBE funding revenue as well as the supplement. And then there's an small administrative fee that the State Charter Schools Commission uses. We can take up to 3%. We have usually never done more than 2%. So that is set to 1% here. And then 2% for year 2, because for year 1 schools, we give you guys a discount. So we take off 1 base point for our year 1 schools. So we're not, so you can have as much money as you can use for year 1. So then what happens is you have all your total state funding. So again, what you want to be careful of is how many kids you are entering for your student enrollment, as well as how many certified staff. Again, don't work this so that your enrollment and your teaching staff somehow make all the other numbers work. So just be mindful when you're doing those types of things. So once you have all your state funding, then down here you can have, if you're going to have a meal plan, and you, again, these are numbers I just pulled out of the air. So don't use this as something that somehow I know something you don't know. If you are going to accept meals fees from students, you can put that in here. Again, put a note as to what type of program or anything you want us to know about this. Also, donations. If you're going to submit that you have a donation, you have to give us documentation of it. So do not put numbers here unless you have something to back it up. Same thing with grants. Now, remember, the planning year, you are not receiving any state funds. So in this example, I have that this school has received $100,000 in donations, and that's what they're going to use to fund their planning year. So then we're going to go into our expenses column, into our expenses area here. So we start off with personnel. Your budget, the personnel is going to be probably your most costly line item. So you want to be realistic and clear as to how much you're going to pay people for the things that they're going to be doing for you. So again, this is someplace where I see a lot of times that the salaries are unrealistic. Be realistic in what type of staffing plan you're going to have. So you do not have to have a staffing plan with all of these people. What we try to do with the budget template is compass as many positions as we possibly can for a budget. So for a lot of things that we see in schools, but again, you don't have to have someone for all of these different positions, but this is that for you to have as many as you can choose from without having to enter stuff yourself. Here we also have a checkpoint. So a lot of times what will happen, again, people say they want to hire a certain number of teachers, but then they budget a certain amount of salary. And so remember, back up on row 6 was where you told us how much you were planning to pay your teachers. And then down here is where you're actually telling us how much you're going to be budgeting for those teachers. So in this example, you were going to hire 27 teachers. And what this is saying is the number of teachers that you can actually hire based on the salary budgeted. So this petition actually proposed that we were going to hire 16, but your budgeting here, what you've actually budgeted would get you 27. So what's happened is you have put in too much money for those teachers. So let's go ahead and knock this down to $900,000. So when you do that, see how it aligns itself? we see this a lot with petitioners. They will put in certain numbers, but they're not then thinking about the math. Like I said, I was going to pay teachers $55,000. I want to hire 16, and then they only put like $300,000 in the budget. So let's mark this down to 300,000. Actually, let me give another 0 here. And again, based on how many teachers with the budget that, how many teachers you said you wanted to hire at the certain salary, you'd only be able to hire 5 teachers. So again, this checkpoint is locked, and it does help you to make you see, does your plan make sense? Is what you're funding, is what you're putting in the budget enough to hire all the teachers that you want to hire? So I'm going to put this back to 900,000. So we're back to where we need to be. This checkpoint is only for the teaching positions. The checkpoint doesn't work with any of the other positions because, again, your teaching staff is critical, and you want to make sure that your staffing plan, especially for your teachers, makes sense. Also, make sure that you include funds for retirement, health benefits, and FICA. We see a lot of times that these are underestimated. There is a salary and fringe calculator that is provided in the portal. You are not required to use it, but it has all the correct percentages, and it makes it very easy. So you just type in a salary and the calculator does everything for you. You do not have to use it. It is a separate tool, but I do think that you will find it helpful. Keep in mind that for all state charter schools, just like any public school, you must participate in the teacher's retirement plan, and you must pay into that. And currently for fiscal year 25, that rate is 20.78, and that is what you will see in the calculator tool that we've provided. So make sure that you fund these items, because a lot of times, again, this is someplace where I see either people are they forget to put funds here, or they wildly underestimate. So once you finish everything on row 81, you're going to have your total personnel expenses. Then you're going to have your instructional costs. So these are things, again, most of the categories we have, you're not going to have to put something for every single thing, but we tried to put as much of this in so you wouldn't have to type in a bunch of things. We do have, anytime you see a blue line, this is somewhere where you can add an expense that is not here. Do not keep it as miscellaneous. Put whatever it is that you're going to be doing. And then if there's something you want us to know about something, maybe you have computers and actually all of these are donated. So you have zeros for computers, but you want us to know that we have a donation of $50,000 from XYZ company, so that we're going to use that for the computers. And again, also make sure that those donations, if they're up there, to make sure that you mark that in your donations for revenue, but again, have documentation to back it up. So here you have all of your instructional expenses. They will total down here. So you don't have to do any of the totaling. You just type in the numbers. This is why this template works. You just type in the numbers and it will do pretty much everything else for you. Then we have our non-classroom related services and supplies. So if you're contracting out services, if you're buying furniture, all of those things, an audit, all of those things that you might need that are not specific to instruction, you're going to put them here. Again, you don't have to have an expense for everything, but we've tried to have this list be pretty comprehensive, so you're not trying to type in a bunch of different things. We do have 2 lines that you can add additional non-instructional costs. And then we have facilities. This is also another place where we see people wildly underestimate how much they're going to need. So make sure that you're realistic. Also make sure that you include funds for renovations, facility maintenance, and repair, because I can assure you that year 1, something's going to go wrong with your building. So make sure that you fund, and you fund realistically. Look at market expenses, look at your if you're considering different properties, provide documentation of the different properties that you might be looking at, the costs that are involved. We understand that because you're just still in this planning phase, you're not going to have an actual lease, but we want to make sure that you are looking at realistic cost for your school in the area that you plan to operate in. Then we have a section here for the contingency. So once you're all done entering your facilities expenses, I'm sorry, let me just go back. Then what happens is this total expense line on 142, it totals your personnel, instruction, non-instruction, facilities, and so on and so forth. So you don't have to do it. It totals it up for you, you move on. You want to make sure if you can, I know it's tough, but you want to have funds for contingency. So this is like money that you're going to try to put aside for your piggy bank. And then there might be a time when you have to take things out of your piggy bank. So in this example, I show that we put 20,000 in year 2, and we estimate we're going to have 10,000 taken out in year 4. Now, down here is where we're going to subtract your total revenue from your total expenses. What we want to see is not necessarily a surplus. Now, I know these surpluses are fairly generous. This is probably way higher that you're going to see, but it does give you an example. And then here, notice remember we had $100,000 in revenue for the planning, but the expenses that were entered, you now have a deficit of $240,000. So one of the things that you want to be careful of, particularly in your planning year, are you going to have enough money, because you're not receiving state revenue to be able to manage in your planning year. So again, this calculates completely all on its own in the template. So you don't have to try to figure it out. It tells you right away if you're in a deficit or if you're in a surplus. Now, this example down here, we have our 100% budget. What this tool does is to help you when you're planning for your 65%, it actually calculates based on what you entered, how many students you would have at 65% enrolled, how many teachers you would have if you had 65%, and what those total personnel expenses as well as your overall expenses would be at a 65% budget. This is just to help you to kind of get you on your way with that 65% budget. Now, if you're doing your 65% budget, and I change this down, what happens is you will just see ignore. And so, so when you're doing your 65% budget, obviously these things don't have to be calculated. Then down here, again, this is a tool, this calculates automatically. This tells you, for example, I have a business manager for my planning year. That business manager represents 13% of my total budget. In year 1, that person is 2%, and so on and so forth. So it actually helps you to see the breakout, so you can see what percentage certain categories are taking up of your budget. This really helps, particularly when you get down to your facilities piece. So in this example, 15% of my budget and planning year is going to be made up of my building. That is going to go down to 3, 2, and 2, which is actually really quite good. This is probably unrealistic, but it helps you to see, again, not just dollars, but what percentage of this is making up my budget. So I've got 5 minutes left, so I got to kind of click it along. I will allow for questions at the end. If we don't get a chance to answer all your questions, we will take all the questions and I can email those responses and we can put them on our website. Cash balances. So this all pulls from the budget template. So again, you really don't have to calculate anything unless you have your beginning operating cash balance. If you're going to have one, it will pull. After your planning year, all of that pulls in from your template. Again, it will calculate if you're going to be in a deficit or a surplus. So you don't have to do it. All of this calculates for you. Then you have your cash flow projections. This is very important. You do not want to have your expenses. I'm just going to show you the year 1 example that I set up. You do not, certain expenses are going to be the same every single month. So your staff, they get paid every single month. It's not pretty much going to change. But there are certain things that you have that are only going to be costs that happen in a certain time. So for example, classroom supplies. This budget had $3,500, but we don't want to see this split over 12 months. Most likely, you're probably going to spend money maybe in July and August. Also, here we have our student assessments, $12,000. That's not going to be spread over all 12 months where you'd see $1,000 a month. You're probably going to see certain expenditures either all at once or larger ones at certain points of the year. And what this does here is it takes the totals that are in your budget template. I just want to pause here. Kristen, if I go beyond 11:30, is that going to cause issues?
No, that should be fine.
Okay, because I don't want to rush, because this part is kind of important. Thank you. So the other thing is the way this template works, it actually pulls in, it actually finds the total that you put in the budget, and it will tell you if what you have entered, because these things you are going to enter, and then it's going to give us a total. And then if something didn't match, so for example, in this example, whatever was put in the budget is not 253,750. So you want to go back to that piece in your budget. If it does align, if you have properly aligned, then it'll show yes. Now, because I had this demonstration, a lot of the things I did, I just divided by 12. For salaries, that makes perfect sense. So you would see, for example, for your teachers, your estimated teachers are going to cost you 75,000. Remember the 900,000 that we planned for that. Now, let's say I accidentally forgot to enter in our June. So what would happen is it would show no, and you can say, oh, wait a minute, okay, I got to go back to the budget. So again, this helps you to make sure, because you're putting a lot of stuff in here. So these checkpoints help you to know whether or not this is making sense. Is your plan making sense? And that's why we put these things in, so they're visual triggers, so you know, okay, these expenses are not actually aligning to what I have in my budget. So you want to go back to your budget and make sure that the amounts that you're putting make sense and align to what you entered. Also making sure that if something's going to happen at a particular time, that you put that expense in that particular month. The point of this is for you to be able to see your cash flows each month. So in this example, in July, we're going to have a deficit, but it's okay if you have a deficit in some months. What you want to make sure of is that you do not end up with an overall deficit, because by state law, you have to have a balanced budget. You cannot be running in the negative. So these checkpoints allow you to see. So if you're in the negative, it's going to change. If you're good, you will see that these numbers are not negative and the school is doing fine. So we do these cash flow projections for your planning year, which for you would be the first year that you're planning your school. And so here, you're not going to have as many expenses as you have in year 1 and year 2. But notice here, remember that deficit we were showing? This is where you want to make sure you have to go back, because clearly in our planning year, we don't have sufficient funds. So we have to think about that. So again, that's what this spreadsheet does. It gives you all these visual triggers to let you know when something is not going correctly. So we have a cash flow projection for year 1. We also have, if you had decided to put money in your contingency or to transfer out, you would enter here. You would just enter positive amounts for both, because the calculation takes into effect and factors negative numbers. So you don't have to worry about that. If you're taking something out, you have to reflect it as a negative. The calculations account for that. We also have the cash flow projections again for year 2. So this school is doing great. But let's say, for example, let's say I'm going to take out, I'm just going to take something out here. Let's say none of these donations pan out. You're not having any grants. And I'm just actually going to physically change this down to 600,000. Let's see what happens. Okay, so when I do all of that, notice all those no's fly up because they're not matching the budget. We're still, apparently I was very generous with my revenue. But if, let's say all of this, let's say we have no beginning cash balance. So this should actually take this out. Notice how suddenly you're in the red across the board. So in this example, you want to check, did I delete something I shouldn't have, though this, you will not be able to delete that in your sample because this is going to be locked. However, I'm just showing this to show you that if you don't have sufficient revenue, the spreadsheet's going to show it to you. And that's when you have to go in, and particularly when you're working with your 65% budget, that's when a lot of this red starts popping up more. And that's when you kind of have to make those difficult decisions. Because remember, if you are not fully enrolled, your building is not going to shrink. There are certain costs that are fixed that cannot be changed. So you're going to have to make changes in other areas. And remember, for everything you do is going to have a cost. So if you decide, all right, hey, we're not going to hire as many teachers, well, that's going to affect your class size, which then may affect your attractiveness to parents who are considering your school. So you might want to look at something else to cut. But so that's what makes the 65% budget particularly difficult to do, because you have to make those harder decisions than the ones you have to make at your 100%. So this is the budget template. I went through that fairly quickly, but as I said, most of what you're doing is going to be typing in numbers, and the spreadsheet is going to be calculating information and telling you if things are going good, if things are not going good. We have the checkpoints. So, and again, make sure, because I read all of the petitions before I dive into the budget, because I want to get a flavor for what you're doing, and I want to make sure that everything you're saying that you're going to do in your petition is reflected as a cost in your budget template. So I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to see if there are any questions.
Got a couple questions. So the first question, when you say intended enrollment for the 65% or 100% budgets, does this refer to year 1, year 3, year 5 enrollment numbers, or the total enrollment?
It refers to the enrollment for each particular year. So that's why, if you notice here, there are the different columns. So we have enrollment for year 1, year 2, all the way through year 5. So the enrollment, even you are going to do the enrollment for each specific year. So this is why whatever's in your petition is what you need to be reflecting here. Does that answer that question?
I think so. The next question is, in planning, what staffing would you advise is most critical to include in the budget if you're making those calls?
You know, it really depends on what you're going to be doing in your planning year. So a lot of people, they will hire their head of school maybe that first year. They definitely usually have someone who's going to handle maybe with maintenance. Kristen, do you have any suggestions on this as well?
I think
it's largely going to depend on what you can afford. I think head of school tends to be the most common hire if you have additional funds. Someone to help with some of the operations or student recruitment tend to be a place where you see some people make investments. But oftentimes it's, from a budget standpoint, limited to head of school.
Any other questions?
I've got one question. During the planning year, are stipends or 1099s acceptable to avoid taxes, benefits, etc. for staffing?
That's again, it's the planning year, so that's up to you. We can't tell you, whether or not, I mean, you are free to do that if that's how you decide you want to operate in your planning year. There's no restriction on that.
All right, couple more. I want to make sure that the state charter school budget funding does not include facilities costs, for example, building rental. Is that correct?
That is correct. So there are not funds provided. Now, you do get a small amount of funding for facilities, but that's wrapped into the charter school supplement. So the piece with the charter school supplement includes that revenue already.
Okay, great. Just one more question. What happens if we project the expense at a certain amount and the actual expenses are less? What is the state procedure to avoid that type of situation?
So what happens is, remember, this is just remember, a budget is a plan. It is what you think is going to happen. It's an exercise in divination. But what's going to happen is, once you are approved as a school, we're not going to hold you to this budget. This was simply for us to see, can you have a functional school, and a big component of that is your understanding of the funding. So if when you start, if you're approved and you're up and running, then this budget, this was just something you did. It is not something we hold you to. So does that address that question?
I believe so. That's the end of the questions for this section.
Okay, great. So one of the things I will tell you is if when you go in and you're doing the budget template and something is confusing you or you just don't understand what to do, please feel free to reach out to the State Charter Schools Commission. But if you are reaching out to me telling me this spreadsheet doesn't work and you converted it to something else, I'm just going to tell you to go ahead and download it again. So just make sure that it's in the correct format. But if you have issues or you encounter something you just are not clear, please feel free to reach out to us. We will address those questions, because I don't want you to think that this is the only opportunity that you're going to have to ask questions regarding this part of your petition. And that's all I have.
And we had one more question in there about whether the template will be emailed, and it is actually embedded in the portal. So the template links are in the budget section of the portal, so you'll download that right out of the portal itself. And that takes us to the end of our presentation today, but happy to stay on and answer any more questions that folks might have about anything that you've heard during the presentation today. Again, to kind of echo Carmen's point, this is not the last opportunity to ask questions. So if you think of something as soon as you log off this webinar, that's completely fine. Please feel free to reach out. I will just add the caveat of that we can provide technical assistance and guidance on how to submit things, what the legal requirements are, what our review process looks like. But really, it's up to you to decide how you want to operate your school. So questions about like what's best to do, should I consider, this position, what should my leadership structure look like? That's the beauty of charter, is the local autonomy that the governing board has when making those decisions for the school. So we don't provide any guidance on how you do the things that you do and what your school plan should look like, but we're happy to answer any sort of technical questions that you might have, or helping you understand what the requirements are as a state charter school. Also, again, tune into that petitioner orientation webinar, that asynchronous webinar that's there, because it does have some broader guidance and tips and tricks that might get a little bit closer to some of those, like what should you consider to put together a quality application. So listen there so you might get some good ideas from that. And somebody asked in here if the webinar is going to be recorded. Yes, it's recorded, and it will be posted on our website later this week. I have a question in here just about how to navigate things that are must do during the planning year. I would encourage folks to look at our pre-opening checklist. So after approval, there's a year-long process before you actually get open. That we use a pre-opening checklist document to manage some of the technical requirements that schools need to have before opening. That is posted on the website in that resources tab under the Starter School page. So feel free to check that out. And that gives you kind of the bare bones technical requirements of what your authorizer is going to be looking for. And so I would start there. Carmen, we have a question in here about budget. It says, is there a budget guideline for salaries, principals, teachers, etc., so that we can avoid overestimating the expense or not overestimating the salary?
So what I would recommend doing is find out the teacher salary that the school district in your area shows you pays. That will give you a realistic estimate as to how much you should be offering your teachers, and also find out, kind of in your area what a principal might make and those types of things, because it is very different depending on where you're going to locate in the state. So obviously in the metro area, you're talking about salaries that are higher than outside the metro area. There is also a state salary schedule that is posted on the Department of Education's website. We also have a tool on the State Charter Schools Commission website for you to find that type of information. But remember, the state salary schedule, most school districts pay more than what's on the state salary schedule, but it does help you to have an idea as to how much you could be paying your teachers. Does that address the question?
I think so.
Okay.
All right, 1 or 2 more minutes for folks to put those questions in the question box. Oh, this is a good one. And Carmen, I'll let you take first stab at it. In year 0, we use the CSP grant to start our budget.
I'm sorry, is that the question? Can they use their CSP funds to fund their
That's
planning
the
year?
question.
So if that's what the funds are for, then yes. And usually I do understand that CSP does provide implementation grants. So yes, if you do receive a CSP funding for implementation, yes, you could use that for your planning year.
But something important to note about Georgia's CSP grant is that it is an award that happens after approval. So that means that you would, unless some other special circumstance occurred, you would not have a grant award for CSP at the time of application. So that it would be unsubstantiated revenue. So don't do that.
Yes, and Kristen makes a good point, especially with the planning year. If you have funds for that planning year, you better have documentation showing that someone's giving you that money and that's guaranteed for that planning year.
There's a question in here about the petitioner orientation. There's a link to it on our Charter Schools page as well as in the actual petition itself, but it is an asynchronous webinar that you would just watch between now and when you submit your petition. And it is meant to be a supplemental training resource beyond boot camp and this webinar that talks a little bit more about the what would make a quality application. So some tips and tricks about what you can expect during a capacity interview, what a good response to a question might look like, what a bad response to a question might look like, that type of thing. So it is linked in our website. You can go and watch it at any point between now and March. But that's kind of the gist of it. There's a question in here, and I'm assuming it's about stuff like additional revenue, and it says, can the documentation be noted as pending approval?
So a lot of times with a funder, I think what you're asking is that you have applied for a grant and a funder has said, yes, we will give you these funds on condition that you actually receive approval. So you would want a letter from the foundation explaining, or the funder explaining how much they would give you for your planning year and that they are committed to providing those funds as long as you receive approval. So that would be sufficient documentation, but you cannot, just because you applied for something doesn't mean that you're going to be able to use that for your planning year funds. You have to have some kind of documentation from a funder that says, we are planning to give you XYZ amount pending your approval.
There was a follow-up question in here about petitioner orientation, about after you watch the training, you would get a certificate. Yes, that certificate comes via email. It usually takes about an hour after you complete the training video for it to come through the system. Last call for questions. We'll stay on for 1 minute more. someone had a question about their certificate and not receiving one from boot camp. This is specific to petitioner orientation, which is separate from boot camp. You would not have gotten a certificate from boot camp. All right, I'm not seeing any other questions. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Like I said, this has been recorded. We'll be posting it on our website. Please feel free to reach out between now and March if you have any questions, and we'll be glad to assist. We look forward to reading your petitions, and good luck.